Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Calls. This is the 2025 Pebble Beach Data Dive Show. We have a lot to get into. We're going to take a look at some historical statistics around Pebble Beach and Spyglass Hill. We're going to examine the players in the field this week. And of course, we're going to start the show off with looking at the forecast. So we have a lot to get into. Let's get into it. All statistics provided tonight and every night are from FantasyNational.com. It is the best golf analytic tool out there for your money. Go check out FantasyNational.com. You will not regret it. In the description of the video, there are links to all of the social media. First off, my X and Instagram, where normally I post research regarding the tournament courses, the course information, some historical patterns that some champions all share. Players in the field who also share those patterns. Didn't do that today just due to the fact that I am still struggling with figuring out what I think is the best way to approach this week, whether we just look at last year and the designate or the signature event, or do we go back the full 5 years. So no research today, but normally if you want to see that weekly research that I do on the PGA Tour, give me a follow at your preferred social media site. X is also where I place my weekly betting cards and top player usage in the DFS contest I play. That comes out every Wednesday after the DFS Tactics show on Wednesday evening, so that'll be out later this week. If you want to see those pieces of information, give me a follow over at X. And then lastly, for social media, Gabe's handle is in the description. He writes a great article called The Fringe. Really can't recommend it enough. It's a fantastic way to start your week of preparation. And if you are a subscriber to his article, which is free to do, you're going to be able to join us in his Substack chat every Wednesday after the DFS Tactics show here at Calls. We continue the DFS talk over there. So make sure you are subscribed to that article and go show him some support. Follow him over on social media. And lastly, for this intro, we are live. Chat's open. Want to hear from you all. Who do you think the favorite is? Have you made any wagers? Who do you think is well positioned to perform well this week around Pebble Beach and Spyglass Hill? So I want to hear from you all. Make your opinions heard. Jump into chat. And if you're not able to catch the show live, as always, put any thoughts in the comments. I will get to those as well. But let's get into it. Let's dig into the weeds of the data for the 2025 Pebble Beach Pro-Am. And we are going to start, as we always do on a Monday night, with the extended look of the forecast around Pebble Beach. And not a whole lot here, at least in terms of wind or rain or anything significant in terms of a forecast. It does look pretty chilly. Highs in the mid to upper 50s throughout most of the week. Might touch 60 on Sunday, but very little wind, as you can see. Very, very little wind. And this leads me to the first, the correction that I need to have. I mentioned last night, and in my defense, I wasn't quite remembering and in the moment, but in Gabe's article, he goes through what historically has went well in terms of wave advantages and whatnot in the past. And here at Pebble Beach and Spyglass and formerly Monterey Peninsula, but Monterey is not being used now since this is a signature event, or since this has become a signature event, I should say. I said last night that you would want to target players on Pebble Beach when it was windy. I got that backwards. In Gabe's article, he goes through a pretty good explanation and historical look at why players have performed better when it's calm over at Pebble. And based on this forecast, it looks like we would want to target the players who are playing Pebble in the easier conditions. Now, these conditions look very, very similar, but I did want to issue that correction from what I said last night. If any wind does pick up in the forecast throughout the week, you would want to target the players that are playing Pebble on the less windy day. And I had that backwards. I said the more windy day last night. So just wanted to issue that correction. But as of right now, there doesn't seem to be much of a course advantage developing, at least at the moment. Of course, we will check in on this to start Wednesday's show as well. But there's a look at the forecast. Very, very little in terms of potential course or wave advantages, anything out of the ordinary here. No rain and not a whole lot of wind. Looks just to be chilly, but good scoring conditions around Pebble this week. So we'll move to Fantasy National just very, very quickly. And I have went ahead and went to the DraftKings kind of page view here, just so that we don't have to see any of the alternates that that were loaded in, maybe after the fact or anything to that effect. 80 players in the field. I have confirmed that this is indeed a no-cut event. So all 80 players are going to get all 4 rounds. No other field changes that I've seen as well. Harry Hall in for Emiliano Grillo being the last field change that I've seen. Hall picking up a sponsor's exemption, which knocked Grillo to the first alternate. We're going to do one quick overview here, or review, I guess, maybe from last night. Let's take a look at performance on short courses, since both Spyglass and Pebble Beach hover right around 7,000 yards. Pebble slightly under, Spyglass slightly over 7,000 yards. So our top performers in the field this week since the beginning of 2024 on courses that are short, again defined as less than 7,200 per Fantasy National. Your top performers on short courses have been Justin Thomas, Ben Griffin, Scotty Scheffler, Sepp Straka, JT Poston, Patrick Cantlay, Keith Mitchell, Max Grazerman, Tom Hoagie, and Austin Eckroat. The Farmers has indeed been loaded into Fantasy National today. I am just going to quickly check Max Homa, considering he was the number 1 putter on POA last night, and considering his very poor performance, that might change. But again, just a it's not in there because of his withdrawal. Dietrich is, or at least played well. The Farmers you see is in there. So, in fact, Max Homa still might rate out number 1 in terms of POA putting, but we'll get into that. But just showing you that the Farmers is indeed in there. All right, with that, I'm actually going to leave this filter on as we move forward. But let's go to Microsoft Excel and take a kind of a deeper statistical look into Pebble Beach. Now, remember, as of last year, this was a signature event. So last year's statistics obviously highlighted in yellow. Before that, Pebble Beach was only seen 2 of the 4 rounds. This was a 3-course rota, very similar to the Amex. So some of the statistics will look a lot lower last year. That's just because of the limited field. But what we can gather, off the tee has been pretty neutralized here throughout the years, especially at Pebble Beach. It is short, it is positional. Distance really just doesn't matter. You can see it was actually a negative factor for the players who finished in the top 30 last year. Just wasn't a factor at all. So not anything to look at in terms of off the tee. Approach, even though last year looks quite low, this is pretty high considering the limited field event. If we go to the Century, for example, a field that is still slightly smaller, but at least comparable, you can see that Pebble Beach is about 60% more important from at least last year's Pebble was 60% more important than this year's Century. Around the green, weighing more than the off the tee. Off the tee has been slightly more consistent, but we did have one pretty big year. And then again, around the green was higher than off the tee last year. So I'm still of the mindset that this is more of a short game course, definitely a second shot course, but more of a short game course than a ball striking course, and putting going to be a major factor. So we're going to take quite a look into some POA putting again, like we did last week for the Farmers. But definitely going to look at approach. Definitely going to look at some around the green. Not going to look at any off the tee. It's just not that important here. Fairways really not all that important. Negative in distance. Fairways were slightly above a 0. It's just not a big deal. Off the tee is just not a big deal around Pebble. Instead, you're going to have to have some pretty tidy around the green game. You're going to have to putt very, very well. And, of course, hit some irons very well to contend. Moving into distance, greens, fairways. Talked about how none of the driving really matters. Greens in regulation will. These greens are so tiny that any green really is going to give a player pretty good opportunity to score. And in fact, even with that very little or very small number from last year, you extrapolate that to a full field, it's going to be a roughly the same, a 3.2 or a 3.3. If we remove last year's just because of the limited field, you can see greens was 11.5% more important than the average full field course. So a big deal. We might be looking at some greens this week. Would make sense. I'm also intrigued to look at some proximities. And there's one in particular that, as I looked throughout today, makes a lot of sense. So definitely going to be wanting to consider greens. I don't know if it'll end up in the mixed condition model come Wednesday night, but definitely nothing with distance or fairways. Good drives, really. I mean, it would be mostly greens, I would think. So scoring, I was a little surprised that the birdies are so much higher here around Pebble. Pebble gets this reputation for being, fairly difficult, being along the coast or whatnot. But there are scoring opportunities, plenty of them around Pebble, but there's also a few difficult holes as well. So you had roughly the same top end birdies and bogeys. Of course, last year's kind of deflated anyway from the limited field. But if you were to compare this to other full field courses, it's actually the bogey avoidance that is higher or more important against the average full field event. So it would make sense to look at both of them. Considering the forecast, we're probably looking at birdies, and birdies are better because eagles do happen around Pebble. Maybe not so much Spyglass, but they do happen around Pebble. Bogey avoidance maybe as well, but there's the look at the scoring, and then as we move into par 3s, 4s, and 5s, the par 3s you can see mostly in these two lengths here, the 175 to 225. A very little in the par 3 7th at Pebble. I know Spyglass has one that measures to this length as well, but they don't contribute nearly, not a whole lot. This is what, 0.9, a little bit more than 0.9 out of a 1.3. That's about 70%. So probably just going to focus on these two lengths here, would be my guess. But then again, maybe total par 3, since there are a few par 3s that measure to these lengths on the courses. Par 4s. Moving across here. Again, last year seems a little bit deflated, but what we're really mainly looking for is where these totals are coming in. Not a whole lot on the two short par 4s, or the one drivable and one short at Pebble. Spyglass doesn't really have any drivable par 4s that I can remember. And the par 4s have been pretty consistent year over year. If you extrapolate from a 80-person field to a full field event, this would come out to about a 4.4 or so. About 2 to 3% less important than the average full field event. The 350 to 4s have some significance here just because there's quite a few of them, and a lot of courses don't on the PGA Tour. But we're mainly looking at these two links, I would think. 354, 400, 450. Now it's interesting, at least on the scorecard, the par 4 ninth on the scorecard measures at 504, but they haven't actually played it 500 plus yards in the past 3 years. So quite interesting. We're looking at mainly these two. Mainly these two links. And then the par 5s, fairly evenly split among these two, but some more added significance in the 500 to 550, which again makes sense. 3 of the 4 at Pebble Beach at least fall to this range. And then lastly, as I was mentioning, I was quite interested in proximities. And proximity doesn't seem like it would add a whole lot because these greens are so small. If you're hitting the green, essentially you're giving yourself a pretty good opportunity. With that said, it has gone down in the past couple of years. But this number here, in the 100 to 125, which is the most prevalent approach length here at Pebble, I want you to take a note of, at least against full field course averages, every single range is negative. You'll just have to take my word that 200 plus is just off the screen. It's negative. There's only one length of approach length that is positive against the average full field course on the PGA Tour. That's the 100 to 125. So that is going to answer the question that I had last night to see if this was statistically significant enough to want to single out and include in the mixed condition model. It looks like it is. As you can see, the 100 to 125 is even larger than 125 to 150. All right, so with that, there's a look at some of the statistics behind Pebble Beach, at least historically. Depending on how well I do, quite frankly, this week, I might remove these prior years and just look at Pebble Beach since it's been turned into a signature event starting in 2026. But as of right now, I am still leaning towards it, looking at all 5 years. But again, I'm not sold on that. And of course, we'll get into some of the research at the end of the show as well. So there's a look at a deep statistical dive into Pebble. So we'll move back to Fantasy National and take a look at the players in the field this week and look at some of the important metrics from what we just looked at in Microsoft Excel. Because there are still a few players that don't have any rounds in here for 2025, and this is a little bit of foreshadowing in terms of the research later. I am actually, you know what? No, I am going to just look at 2025. I think it's still important enough to find players that are in good form, not shaking off the rust, or at least have had competitive rounds. I'm not counting the TGL tonight and whatnot. So your top approach players in the field this week in 2025 so far. Again, very, very small sample size, but I think it warrants attention. Your top approach players have been Johnny Vegas, Hideki, JJ Spawn, Sam Stevens, Colin Morikawa, Tom Hoge, Sepp Straka, Tom Kim, Nick Taylor, and Bobby Mack. Do note Colin Morikawa, it's only one tournament. Tom Kim, it's 2 tournaments. Really, the only player in the field this week that has played all 4 tournaments has been Eric Cole, Century, Sony, Amex, and Farmers. You have a few players that have played 3, but Eric Cole's the only one that's played all 4. And you can see his irons have not been very, very good yet in 2025. So there's a look at your top approach players. We're definitely not going to ignore around the green. Very important around Pebble Beach. So your top around the green players in 2025. Very little sample size, but again, your top players: Sung Jae, Ben On, Cameron Young, Stefan Yeager, JT Poston, Taylor Moore, Nico Echeverria, Patrick Cantley, Doug Gim, and Taylor Pendrith. We'll take a look at putting. Give me a moment as I include some more years here, all the way back to 2022. We're going to take a look at some putting. POA putting, Pebble, Riviera, and Torrey Pines South. We did this last week for the Farmers. Of course, we'll do it again this week since we're on POA. Your top POA Anna putters, specifically California POA Anna putters. In the past 3 years, Denny McCarthy, Max Homa, so he has fallen to second, Matthew Pavone, Tom Hoagie, Harris English, Mav McNeely, Seamus Powers, Sung Jae, Colin Morikawa, and Bo Hostler. Your top POA putters in the past 3 years. And of course, we're going to take a look at some spike percentage as well. Your top spike putters, again using the 3.0 cutoff, players that have gained 3 or more in their rounds. Not going to be a whole lot here, but those players are Harry Hall, leading the way with Austin Eckroat. Very, very little sample size, but Eckroat and Hall, 25%. Sam Stevens, Seamus Power, Max Homa, Ludwig Ober, all up near 20%. Pavone, Knapp, Wyndham Clark, defending champion, Eric Van Rooyen, Harris English, Sung Jae, Dietrich, Hoagie, and Fleetwood are the rest that have double-digit percentage, 10% or more. Some notables here. Surprised to see Mav McNeely at 0. He's generally very good on POA, but he hasn't spiked. He's just been good. Struggled on the greens at the Farmers last week, but he also struggled there last year. Pebble was fine. The Genesis in 2022, he gained all 4 rounds. And then Pebble and Farmers, he was very good in 2022. So kind of fallen a little bit, or at least has lost some form recently on POA putting. But he hasn't gained 3. He's had several close, 2.8, 2.9, 2.8, but never gained 3. He's never spiked. Some other notables here: Nick Taylor, former champion. Justin Rose, former champion. Not spiked on POA putting, but at least in the past 3 years, but have putt pretty well. Taylor Moore, 0. Poston. Lee Hodges has not spiked. Rory, Sepp Straka. Straka has lost on POA his past 5 rounds. Okay. Lost both rounds of the Genesis last year. Lost both rounds at Pebble Beach last year. Okay. So there's a look at some of the players who have not spiked at all. 0% in terms of putting on POA. And Rasmus Højgaard, this is his, inaugural event on POA. He has never put POA, at least on the PGA Tour. So there's a look at some of your spike performers on POA. I am kind of interested to see here, like players like Rose, 24th, so he's been good, he's just not spiked. Nick Taylor was another one. Where was he? 26. So these guys have been good on POA. They just haven't spiked. Some of your worst putters. Let's do it this way. Some of your worst putters on POA: Johnny Vegas, Lucas Glover, Cam Davis has not putt California POA all that well. I mean, he gained a 10th and then gained a little over 1 the first round at the Genesis last year, but other than that, it's been pretty bad. Finau, at least since 2022, has been pretty darn bad on POA. He's only gained once in his past, 9 rounds on POA? Twice in his last 10, if you want to include the first round of the Farmers. So he's been struggling on POA putting, at least recently. He did last year, and last week didn't help him any. Connors, Spieth has struggled with some California POA past 3 years. So there's a look at some of your worst performing putters on POA California POA the past 3 years. All right. With that, we're going to move to fairways and greens. And again, the only thing that makes sense here would be to look at greens gained. I still don't know if I'm going to put this in the mixed condition model, but on short courses, your top greens gained players in the past 13 months: Scotty, Sepp Straka, Tom Kim, Max Grazerman, Aaron Rai, Justin Thomas, JJ Spawn, Keegan, Ben Griffin, Obear, Finau, and Novak. Be interested to see how this particular set of names match up with the top performers from 100 to 125. See if there's a whole lot of overlap there. I'll be interested to see that. So I'm going to try to take a quick mental snapshot of those names, try to remember them. But really, anything in this on this page view would basically come down to greens. We might want to take a look at scrambling. Would make some sense if around the green's going to be such a big factor. That means players might not be scrambling all that well, or they're going to have to scramble. And if we take a look at the course breakdown from last night, players were slightly less successful scrambling here than the average tour event. So, okay, I can maybe see it. If we take a look at scrambling, perhaps on POA, that might yield some interesting results. Your top scramblers when on POA greens in the past few years: Harris English, Sam Stevens, so 1-2 from last week; Taylor Pendrith, who's generally played the Farmers pretty well; Jake Knapp, Russell Henley, Bo Hostler, Scotty Scheffler, J-Day, Denny McCarthy, and Will Zalatoris are your top scramblers. So, interesting. I kind of like that. J-Day's had a lot of success here. Again, 1-2 from last week, English and Stevens. Knapp, I believe, played Pebble pretty well last year. Let's see. He wins. Oh, he was Farmers. He was third at the Farmers last year. Didn't play Pebble. But yeah, okay. And then, he putt extremely well last week. All right. Okay. So there's your top scramblers. So the more I'm thinking about it, the more scrambling might also be a consideration on this page view. We'll move to scoring. Birdies and bogeys. Again, I don't like using the average average scoring relative to par. That's just a personal preference on my end. With that forecast, Pebble last year was average in round one in terms of difficulty, but mostly played easy. But in years prior, Pebble and Spyglass have been more average and difficult. You had a few rounds of easy. This was mainly Monterey. That round of easy was on Pebble. This round of easy was on Pebble in 2022. So it's a mixed bag. It really is a mixed bag. Hey, good evening, Phil. Thanks for jumping in chat. Good to see you. Hopefully you had a good Farmers. I was very, very close to having an outstanding Farmers, and then Sam Stevens decided to dunk it in the water on 18 to really kind of remove him from having a chance. But mine was decent, definitely a lot better than the Amex. So I'm gonna try to build on that momentum. Good to see you this evening. Thanks for jumping in chat. So like I said, I don't like using this average scoring relative to the par filter, and I'm not confident it's going to be easy. Spyglass is generally pretty difficult, but considering that forecast, I don't think it's going to play difficult either. Saw your Stevens play and was rooting. I appreciate that. Thomas Dietrich played pretty well. He was my most used player in DFS. I used Sam Stevens a bunch and had the outright. So those two plays, as I mentioned last night, I had several very good things. Dietrich and Sam Stevens, the complete fade of Tony Finau. I had a lot of good things. I also had a lot of bad things, as in Max Homa being my number one player. He did not play well. Nate Lashley, bad. So when you have some good and some bad, it's going to turn into about an even week, which is what I had. Let's see. Instead of coming back to looking at scoring here, instead of looking at scoring with this filter here, we're just going to look at scoring on short courses. Spyglass and Pebble, both very, very short. So your top birdies or better gained players on short courses in the past 13 months. Birdies are better. Cantley, Nico Echeverria, Grazerman, Tom Hoagie, former champion here, Wyndham Clark, Scotty Scheffler, Mav McNeely, Harry Hall, Justin Thomas, and Akshay Bhatia and Eric Cole. Homa pick, he started making a bit of a comeback with that eagle. Yeah, he just never really was in it though. If he can't play well at California, I have a lot of concerns about Max Homa moving forward, because that's usually where he makes his hay, is on POA in California. He's not playing well. He didn't play well at the Century. Didn't play well last week at the Farmers. Not a lot going well for him. You can see he's down here near the bottom in terms of birdies or better gained. A lot of issues, I think, for Homa. And of course, we saw this earlier, but his statistics from the Farmers aren't in here because he was a withdrawal. So he never finalized his stats, essentially. But I mean, you see the Century wasn't all that great. Got some concerns with Max, especially with the driver. His driver looks wayward. Looks bad right now. There's your top birdies or better game players. Your top bogey avoiders on short courses. Justin Thomas, JJ Spawn, Bo Hostler, Andrew Novak, Scotty, Keegan, Ricky Fowler, Brian Harmon, Seamus Power, and Ludwig Aubert. There's your top 10 bogey avoiders on short courses. Okay. We're going to move to proximity, 2025, 2024. Again, it looks like this 100 to 125 is the proximity we want to focus based on, this astronomical discrepancy between approaches here versus the average tour event from this range. And statistically, we saw in Microsoft Excel, this range was the only range at Pebble Beach that was positive in terms of performance. versus the average tour event. So since the beginning of 2024, your top proximity players from 100 to 125 yards. Tom Hoge, again, former champion here. Hoge, Justin Thomas, Hideki, Eric Cole, Nick Taylor, another former champion here. Scotty, Cameron Young, Lucas Glover, Corey Connors, JJ Spawn. This is probably going to be a decent weight in the mixed condition model. So don't be surprised if Hoge really rises. All of these players rise considerably, considering how well they've performed 100 to 125. And then moving to par 3s, 4s, and 5s. Par 3s, we'll take a look at all of them, but majority of the strokes gained came between these two ranges here. What do you think of Dietrich? Are you talking like first round leader? I don't do a whole lot with first round leader. This doesn't seem like a great fit. Like Farmer's made a lot of sense because he could really take advantage with his length, which is what you needed at the Farmer's. This doesn't feel like a great Dietrich fit. Having said that, like what's his performance been here at Pebble? 4th last year. I think that might have been some smoke and mirrors though. You see he was 4th. He gained a little bit with the putter, but was bad with the irons. Sorry, there's just not a good place for me to swivel out and get out of the way. He was middling in 2023. I don't know. He's got some really good form right now. Again, just conceptually, just doesn't feel like a great fit. 30% of Scheffler. You and I are on opposite ends of the opposite ends of thought process there. I'm probably not going to play Scheffler just because I want to see how he's doing with his coming off that injury, that surgery on his hand. You know, and I understand that's a big gamble for me to take, but I took one last week with Finau, and it paid off in that regard. So I don't know. I'm always wary of players and injuries. That's why I'm not super excited about Jordan Spieth this week. It's just one of those things where I want to see continued health, sustained health, sustained performance. And this is the first competitive rounds for Scheffler. I think there's more to be gained by avoiding Scheffler this week than there is playing him. Because again, we'll see Wednesday night when ownerships are more stable and whatnot. I would have to venture that people are still gonna play Scheffler. My answer to that might change depending on what his ownership is. If it's something ridiculous like 10 to 12%, then I would be much more inclined. But normal circumstances, saying Scheffler's around 20% or so, I'm probably going to avoid him just because I don't like the fact that he just hadn't been able to play yet. Which leads us into what we'll be looking at here momentarily in the research. Par 3s, you can see your top par 3 performers, but again, you're really wanting to look at these two ranges for the most part. So somebody like Nico Echeverria might be slightly misleading because he does very well on these shorter par 3s, which there are a couple around Spyglass and Pebble, but again, mostly they're in this 175 to 225 range. The par 3s at Pebble, other than the iconic 7th, are pretty long. So I'd be much more inclined on somebody like Matt Fitzpatrick, 5th and 5th. Somebody like Mav McNeely, 6th and 9th in these two ranges, as opposed to Nico Echeverria, who's number 1 total, but it's more so in these short par 3s. So again, I would be focused on the players who are very good at both of these ranges. But I am going to look at all par 3s because, we still have a par 3 that's short at Pebble. I believe Spyglass has one that's pretty short. Let's see. Spyglass has one that is short. That is 130. They also have one that is 172, 178, and 203. So they have a good mix of par 3s, one in each of those ranges. I was wrong when I went through Microsoft Excel. Spyglass does have a drivable par 4, just like Pebble. Interesting. So I was mistaken with that. 349 is their other one, so not necessarily drivable. Their par 4s are more in the 400, 450 range. Okay. I'm going to leave that up as we move through these par 3s, 4s, and 5s. So perhaps par 3s, total par 3s is the right way to look at it. I was more so concerned with, where the strokes gained came in Microsoft Excel, where they were in these two ranges mostly, but maybe it is total par 3s. Par 4s, again, most of it was in the 350 to 450 range, these two here. So somebody like Scotty, number one in both of those. Granted, he's number one in all of these ranges. Colin Morikawa, second and third. Interesting to note, like, Scotty's been, at least in this field, fairly mediocre on drivable par 4s or, extremely short ones. That's a very small sample of what's going to happen this week, but it is something that he has not taken advantage of necessarily. Somebody like Sam Burns has been good on these shorter par 4s, 350 to 450. Wyndham Clark, Taylor Pendrith, been very good on these shorter par 4s. Shane Lowry, Sahith Theegala. So again, I would focus mainly on these two ranges here, but there are a couple of drivable par 4s around Pebble and Spyglass. You do have some longer ones, not very many, but a couple. So mainly looking in this range here, these two. And then lastly, par 5s. Mostly looking at 500 to 550, I would think. This is Spyglass, but they have 560, 561, 549, 595. So really only one of those is not, going to play close to that 550 range. Those others, 560, 561, you can see them, coming down to under 550 when they move tees and pins around. So probably looking mostly at 500 to 550 if I had to guess. That range. So your top 500 to 550 par 5 performers: Justin Thomas, Scheffler, Mark Hubbard, Grazerman, Vegas, Siwoo, Zalatoris, Hoagie, Doug Yim, and Ben Griffin. All right, I'll go back to the strokes gained. Let's go to the early look file, and then we'll finish the show off with some research, or what I would have posted for research had I posted it. I just didn't feel comfortable. I'm still going back and forth with myself whether I want to look at 1 year of data or all 5. But for this exercise, we'll take a look at, in the past 5 years, your top performers at these various metrics that we have been talking about tonight at Pebble Beach specifically. So we'll sort on approach. Your top approach players the past 5 years in the field this week. At Pebble Beach, Kevin Yu, very middling in terms of success, but he's been very good with the irons. You see his downfall, per usual for Kevin Yu. Matthew Pavone was very good here, coming off his win at the Farmers. Scotty was very good last year with the irons. Eric Cole's been pretty solid. Svensson, if he gets in the field, has been good with the irons. Now, Spieth has been very good here at Pebble Beach, just in general, despite the relative lack of putting success. Harman, Cam Davis, again, he has been very, very bad on POA putting. But, man, he's been good everywhere else, at least in all other aspects of the game, I should say. Wyndham Clark, last year's champion, has been okay. Brendan Todd, Tom Hoge, a former champion, but Tom Hoge's not really a good putter, and he has putt very well at Pebble, so something to keep your eye on. Speaking of putting, your top putters the past 5 years in the field this week at Pebble Beach. Grillo, if he gets into the field. Pavone, it's just one time. Bezadenut's putt well. There's Tom Hoge. Denny McCarthy has putt well. No surprise. Wyndham Clark. Mackenzie Hughes, doing Mackenzie Hughes things, putting well, been okay around the green, slightly above field average, but ball striking has been pretty atrocious. Brendan Todd, been pretty darn good around Pebble Beach, and he's absolute minimum price $6,000. So if you're going to try to get greedy and play a bunch of Scheffler, might be worth a look to a minimum price Brendan Todd, especially since he has all 4 rounds. Power's been good here on the greens and in general, been on. Sam Burns. Nick Taylor, a former champion, he's been very good around here. Paul Hostler's been very good around here, at least on the greens. Irons not so much, but on the greens he's been good. We're going to skip all the way to, let's go bogey avoidance. Top bogey avoiders around Pebble. Ken Grillo, JT last year was good. Seabass, Taylor Pendrith, J-Day, Eric Cole. Max Homa's been avoiding bogeys well around Pebble Beach. Obear last year, only one time. There's Tom Hoge again, Matt McNeely, Harman, Dietrich. Dietrich was pretty solid here last year, as we saw. I think it was, a 4th place finish. Cantley's been amazing around Pebble, doing it with the bogey avoidance, but more so in the birdies. Hostler again. Hadwin, 2 for 3, but avoiding bogeys. I want to get into the research. So the last thing I'll show, your top proximity 100 to 125 players. Past 5 years that are in the field this week at Pebble. JT, Morikawa, Scheffler, Chris Kirk, new name. Only 2 for 4, so he's had very middling results. But he's been very good at this range of proximity, or this approach range. Max Homa again, Tom Hoge again. Ben Griffin, very lackluster in terms of success. Siwoo, very lackluster in terms of success, but have been pretty solid at this range of approach shot. Eric Cole, Eckroat, 1 for 2. JJ Spawn, 2 for 4. Okay. I'll sort this on the finish, and then I'll show you what I would have posted in terms of research had I felt comfortable or confident enough to do it. Well, again, we'll take a look at the winner matrix first. This is performance of champions at that tournament, in this case Pebble Beach, prior to their win. So you see Wyndham Clark, he had a previous top 20 but didn't play it the year prior and then wins as a signature event. Justin Rose was very mediocre the year before, but he had a historical top 10. Now Tom Hoge had played pretty well here the year prior. Berger had generally just played well around Pebble Beach if he had decided to play. Nick Taylor, solid. Top 30, top 10, top 30. Phil Mickelson just dominated this place. Even Ted Potter Jr., which was a surprise the year he won, he had a previous top 20. So majority of these players had a previous top 20 around Pebble So that leads to a couple of interesting things. Not only is it course, maybe not preference, course comfortable at the course familiarity, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But be interested to see, how well these guys played at the Amex. So if we take a look at that, because that's another, Pro-Am style tournament. Wyndham Clark, wasn't fantastic by any means, but he at least played the Amex pretty well. Justin Rose, close to a top 25 at the Amex. Tom Hoge was second at the Amex. Daniel Berger didn't play the Amex. Nick Taylor missed the cut at the Amex, but lost a bunch on the green. Phil Mickelson, second at the Amex. So there was quite a bit of correlation as well between performance at the Amex and performance at Pebble Beach, because those are Pro-Ams. So guys that are comfortable playing in a Pro-Am format. So that's something else that you might want to look at is players that have performed well at Pro-Ams, particularly the American Express. So previous top 20 performance at the Amex. Well, I also want to show you, and this is why I'm waffling back and forth a lot. Let's take a look at what some of these champions had done just early on in that season. We did the same thing for the Farmers. Torrey Pines is not a place you wanted to knock off the rust. You wanted players that at least had some competition under their belt early in the year. Let's take a look at what former champions have done at Pebble. Wyndham Clark was pretty middling, to be fair. But Rose had a top 20 at the Farmers, then comes and wins Pebble when it was still a full field event. Tom Hoge, a couple of missed cuts, but had a top 5. In fact, a runner-up. Berger, I believe this is 10th at the TOC, 7th at Sony. So most of these players had most of these players had a very good tournament. But what you see is all of them had at least knocked the rust off. Like 2018, who is that? 2018 is Ted Potter. So that he was a complete shock when he won. He had no form, really. He was good around the green, but he had no form. But he had at least knocked the rust off. He had at least played. 2017, I believe, is Phil. You can see his spectacular start to the year. These guys have knocked the rust off. 2017, no, it was Spieth. My apologies. So they had at least knocked the rust off. In terms of their, most recent tournament, all of them have, at least knocked the rust off, like I keep mentioning. But there wasn't a lot of consistency here. Like some guys had gained and lost off the tee. Some guys had gained and lost an approach and around the green. Like Farmers, you could look at maybe putting at the Farmers, but even that was pretty hit and miss. Rose had gained. 2022, Tom Hoge had lost at the Farmers. There's Hoge there, 0.6. Lost there, gain there. It was pretty hit and miss in terms of putting on POA. And then nothing really statistically stood out in terms of their, their most recent performance. So really, you're just kind of looking at guys who have played Pebble before, had some success recently, maybe not recently, but had some prior success. Most of these have had a prior top 20. And then mainly guys who have at least knocked the rust off. Like, you don't want to, and that's why I'm a little worried about Scheffler. He just hadn't played yet. He's the best player in the world, but he just hasn't played yet. Why I'm worried about guys like Rasmus Højgaard. I'm sure they've been playing over on the DP World Tour, but they don't have anything on the PGA Tour. So there's that's going to be the show this evening. Taking a big, deep statistical look at Pebble Beach and some of the players in the field this week. Good questions, Phil. Much appreciated for jumping in chat this evening. Wish I could give you more solid answers, but at least in terms of Dietrich, it doesn't conceptually feel like a good fit. But hard to deny his past success, especially last year here. Now Scheffler, I won't be able to answer until some of those ownerships get stabilized. But I would have to think I'm probably going to fade him based on everything else. I'm thinking of having not played. He was good here last year, but the injury and all that. So wish I could give you more solid answers. I will be able to Wednesday night for sure. But thanks for jumping in chat. Much appreciated. Thanks to everyone else out there who tunes in, watches, listens, supports the channel by liking the videos, commenting, and subscribing. I always appreciate it. Love what I do. Taking a very in-depth look at golf statistics, giving you a statistician's view of what he sees, trying to help us all win a little bit of money in the process. I have, like I mentioned last week, I generally have some good recommendations and some bad recommendations. So trying to help us all win a little bit of money in the process. Some weeks are better than others. We're going to try to continue the momentum we built from the Farmers after a disastrous Amex. We actually had some momentum for the Farmers. We're going to try and build on that and finally get a win in 2025 since we've been close twice. Thanks again for all the support, for all the wagers you made so far this week for Pebble Beach Pro-Am, for all the wagers you're thinking about making this week for the Pebble Beach Pro-Am, and until I see you Wednesday night for the DFS Tactics show, may all your bets be profitable.